Architecture is so much a part of our lives, we may not even notice it. It offers shelter, it's our indoor space, our domestic abode, but it's much more than that. Great architecture through the ages has created a unique space for spiritual, political, and public life. But at heart, architecture is practical. Buildings derive their form from the materials and techniques used in their construction. In spite of the great variety of buildings found around the world, there are only a few basic construction techniques. Some of these are the post and lintel, the arch, and the dome, which were used almost exclusively until the mid-1800s. In the post and lintel technique, the posts support a crossbeam called the lintel. The arch allowed builders to span much greater distances. The stepped or corbelled arch used by the Maya of Central America is much less efficient. Domes were engineered by the ancient Romans. A dome is a form of arch that covers a circular, octagonal, or square area. Looks can be deceiving, however, because the great stupa temple at Sanchi in India looks like a dome, but it's solid masonry. One breakthrough in building techniques came in the 1800s with the development of frame construction. Vertical and horizontal members form a kind of cage that supports the structure and the roof. After the 1860s, when steel was developed, even larger, stronger, and more fire-resistant buildings could be built. The invention of the elevator led to the rise of the first skyscrapers. Concrete, invented by the Romans, came back into general use when steel rods and cables were embedded in the material. Called ferroconcrete, it's the steel-reinforced concrete construction we see everywhere. The history of architecture is the history of the development of these various building techniques. The earliest form, post and lintel, is the simplest construction method, and it is still used almost everywhere around the world. The Parthenon Temple in Athens is one of the most famous examples of post and lintel construction. The Romans developed the arch. It allowed them to create larger spans and to enclose larger spaces. The shape of the arch transfers the weight of the material outward and downward to the ground. Because of this, the walls or piers supporting an arch need to be very thick, or given extra strength or buttressing along the sides. A single arch can create a gateway. A row of arches can make a bridge, or, as here, an aqueduct. In the Roman Colosseum, rows of arches called arcades support several upper stories. By extending the arch, the Romans created a barrel vault. When two barrel vaults intersected, they formed a cross vault. Here the Romans used a dome to enclose the vast interior space of the Pantheon. The dome of the Pantheon is built mostly of concrete and survived the fall of the Roman Empire. It is one of the best preserved buildings from the ancient world. In Western Europe, from about 400 to 800, the so-called Dark Ages, the most common major buildings were fortresses and castles. A style of building emerged called Romanesque because it used the Roman arch and barrel vaults as the basic unit of construction. Romanesque churches were built to emphasize height. Soon a new type of arch, the pointed or Gothic arch, had been developed to create even higher interior spaces. The pointed arch was much more stable than the round arch and allowed for higher and higher buildings. But the sharp angle of the arch directed the weight down and out. This structure, called the flying buttress, directed that downward thrust away from the load-bearing walls and into the mass of the buttress column. This eliminated the need for very thick, weight-bearing walls. This gave the stained glass artisans the opportunity of a lifetime. Colored light flooded the interiors and heightened the sense of otherworldly spirituality. By the year 1400, a new style emerged. Its source was found in the newly rediscovered art and architectural styles of ancient Greece and Rome. The revival of these classical forms is called the Renaissance. Florence, Italy, was the center of Renaissance thinking, and the Duomo, its cathedral, was the first large dome structure built since ancient times. Architect Filippo Brunelleschi used an inner and outer dome. This dome served as a model for many dome buildings to follow. The Venetian architect Andrea Palladio most closely associated his designs with the forms of classical building. At the same time, China's architecture was the inspiration for Japanese buildings. The flared, overhanging roof eaves are a hallmark of Chinese architecture as well as Japanese architecture. In Europe by 1600, a new style called the Baroque made excessive use of the classical arches, columns, and domes. But it was Versailles, the palace of the French kings, that became the model for all others. The sheer size of these palaces were meant to display the absolute power of the kings. Their new or neoclassical style became an inspiration for people like Thomas Jefferson and other builders of the early Republic of the United States. It wasn't until the 1850s that another breakthrough construction technique occurred, frame construction, built like a cage that could carry its own weight so the interior spaces could be open. Cast iron and later steel gave the frame great strength, not the walls, so that larger and larger interiors like the great exposition halls and the great train stations of the 19th century could be built. Gustav Eiffel's Great Tower of 1889 demonstrated the possibilities that are still being exploited in the 21st century. Skyscrapers, first pioneered in Chicago, used masonry walls in the beginning, but only out of habit, not for structural reasons. The 20th century glass curtain walls were hung from the steel frameworks. First developed by German architects like Mies van der Rohe, they became the norm, the international style of the mid-20th century. Concrete, first used by the Romans, was upgraded by embedding steel rods and cables in the mix. The architect Le Corbusier used steel-reinforced concrete or ferroconcrete almost exclusively. Frank Lloyd Wright exploited the material to develop new organic curves and circles. The Sydney, Australia Opera House is a dramatic example of the possibilities of ferroconcrete construction. New materials and new construction methods helped architects of the late 20th century break away from glass boxes and traditional forms. One postmodern idea found in Paris's Pompidou Center placed all the heating, cooling, and plumbing components on the outside of the structure. Along with high-tech materials, the world of architecture today is a feast of various styles. Like the art of this age, architecture is an expression of individual aspirations that we can live and work in.